You know, my first impression of what happened here was this was just some little old inconsequential skirmish, one of those little side, events in the Revolutionary War. When this battle occurred, it was after the Battle of Blackstocks, which was on November the 20th of 1780. And in Blackstocks, Sumter was in the Catawba Indian Reservation. Cornwallis was in Winsboro, and those areas are not that too far apart. And Sumter was, raiding the mills. That's what they did. They plundered them, getting horses and stuff like that from the Catawba Indian Reservation. And Cornwallis was raiding mills and getting horses, and they were running into each other, and they were getting the same mills. And that was really getting on Cornwallis's nerves. So he called none other than Bannister Tarleton, who was chasing none other than Francis Marion, saying that, hey, forget about Marion, I need you to take care of Sumter. Sumter's more important to me right now. And that's when Tarleton said, well, even the devil himself couldn't catch that damned old fox. And he's the one that gave the swamp fox, Francis Marion, his name, Bannister Tarleton. So Tarleton starts chasing after Sumter. Sumter has 1,000 men. And he retreats till he gets to the perfect defensive setup, which is Blackstocks Farm on the Tiger River. And Tarleton knows that Sumter's up there, and he charges right ahead, which is what he always did, and he always did extremely successfully. And he takes his fastest men, 270 of his British Legion who were mounted, his cavalry, and then he doubled them up with 100 infantrymen riding double on the horses. So he had a total of 270 men. And Sumter in his perfect defensive position with 1,000 men. Tarleton charges right into it. He gets obliterated, 92 killed, 100 wounded. And during that battle, one of the very last casualties, Thomas Sumter went down to see the disposition of the British troops, and somebody let loose with a blast of shotgun pellets loaded in a Brown Bess musket. And Sumter got severely wounded in his right shoulder, and he was out of the war for the next 4 to 6 months. So, at Blackstocks, those 1,000 men of Sumter, there were 3 regiments from Georgia with him. Samuel, Elijah Clarke, John Twiggs, and Benjamin Few. Those regiments would have been 60 to 100 men each. And John Twiggs was second in command at Blackstocks. And when Sumter got wounded, Twiggs now was the commanding officer, and he chose to retreat, wisely so. But that was a substantial victory over Bannister Tarleton, Tarleton's first defeat. So the Georgians start to come back home, and they are joined with 2 very important, influential colonels with their regiments, and these are Samuel Hammond. Samuel Hammond actually was a major. He was a 24-year-old major. And James McCall, who was about 35 years old, he was a colonel. They had 2 regiments. And this is their area. James McCall lived in Abbeville, right close to Andrew Pickens. And Samuel Hammond was the commander of the lower 96th Regiment, which is Newberry County, even though he was from North Augusta. But he led the Newberry County militia throughout the war. So those men are coming back this way, the Georgians, and going back to Georgia. And Hammond and McCall are with them. When they get word that there is a Tory fort 18 miles upstream from right here where we are. And the only reference to this comes from Samuel Hammond's memoirs. And he says that the Patriot regiments, those 5 regiments, they were coming down attack that fort 18 miles upstream from here. And 18 miles upstream from here is Piedmont. And there is a ford at Piedmont. So that's probably why the camp was there. Now, this camp was based out of the British stronghold at 96. From 96, there were satellite forts all throughout the backcountry. Fort Prince in Spartanburg County was, for instance. Fort Gowan was. Fort Rutledge up on Clemson campus. That was one of the outposts. Fort Williams, right in the Lawrence County line. There was an entire series of forts based out of 96, and these forts and outposts were controlling the backcountry. They were plundering, they were raiding. And those Tories who were 18 miles upstream from here, from their camp, they would have been raiding the settlers that were around here. Now, there weren't very many settlers around here because until 1777, a mile upstream was Cherokee territory, which was illegal for any European to live there, even though they did it anyway. But anyway, so there weren't very many settlers, but that fort in Piedmont would have been foraging and plundering whatever settlements they were. And the place where they were is a place where a fellow named Hoyle used to be. It's Hoyle's old place is where that fort was. So here come these 5 regiments, and they're coming down to attack the fort up there. And I think that somehow they must have got between the ford and the fort and cut off the access for this fort to cross the Saluda and then get on down to 96 as quick as they can. Because what happened was the Patriots started chasing the folks in that Tory fort down this river. There was nowhere to get across. There was nowhere to get across till you came to right here. And the Tories crossed to the other side. And it was close to dusk when the Patriots got here. And they got here and they started spreading out all along this riverbank right here. Now, these regiments would have had 60 to 100 men each. So we're looking at 300 to 500 men all along down through here. And, you know, they want to cross, but you've got it 100, 150 at least, and I'll go over those numbers a little bit later, over here contesting the cross. Now, you're not going to go across that river right there. Somebody's over yonder with a rifle, you know, picking you off. A shootout occurred between both of these two sides. And those rifles are pretty darn accurate up to 200 yards on both. Well, most of the Tories, now they may have been loaded with muskets, armed with muskets. I'm sure they had riflemen as well. And it would have been primarily rifles over here on the Patriot side that are accurate up to 200 yards. Muskets are accurate to 80 yards, but they definitely had rifles over there. Started shooting back and forth. There were 4 to 6 killed on each side, including Captain Benjamin Hatcher, who was Susan's 5th great grandfather. So that's the only known casualty that we have. This battle occurred on December the 4th, 1780. Okay, it had a little shootout. So what happened next? What happened next was this group of Tories came on through, and they came on through to the fort at 96. They came on by the home place of Andrew Pickens, and they came on by the home place of James McCall. Remember, they just had a shootout with James McCall. So, an instrumental occurrence that happened in early December of 1780 was the fact that Andrew Pickens' home was plundered. His family was abused. James McCall's plantation was totally destroyed. They were neighbors. Who did this? So the word has been for the longest time that the leading bad guy for the British Army, his name was James Dunlop. Now, our next visit is going to be all about James Dunlop. But James Dunlop was an enforcer. He was a Queen's Ranger. And if anybody's going to burn Andrew Pickens' home down, it's going to be James Dunlop. But we know James Dunlop was in Charleston recruiting from November to January during this time. And, then the word was, well, okay, he came back, destroyed Pickens' home, and then he went back to Charleston. He could have done that. He's the kind of guy that would have done that. But I think he's been in Charleston the whole time. And here we are, first part of December. A band of plundering Tories comes through. Right past Andrew Pickens' house, right past James McCall's house. Those places are both plundered. We don't know the date of when this occurred. It's never been recorded in history. There's some evidence that by December the 8th, Andrew Pickens had given up his British patrol protection. Andrew Pickens said, I will lay down my arms and I won't fight again if you can protect me. Because Andrew Pickens and John Thomas Sr. and Leroy Hammond and the leading patriots of the era, General Andrew Williamson, they all gave their parole for protection because they had defeated the Cherokees, which is the biggest problem that they were ever worried about. And so Andrew Pickens says, okay, we don't have to worry about the Cherokees. If you can protect me, I will lay down my arms. So here, all of a sudden, first part of December, Pickens' home is destroyed. I think the home place stood, but all of his outbuildings and everything was destroyed, and everything at McCall's place was destroyed. At McCall's place, the plunderers put a rope around his 13-year-old son's neck and told him, where's your father? Where's your father? And he did not know. They didn't kill him. And that 13-year-old boy rode up to be the father of Georgia history. It's Hugh McCall, who wrote the first history book of Georgia. We'll talk about that some. It was incredibly full of errors, but anyway. He was 15 when his father died, and he talked to all of his friends, father's friends, and related their stories into his history book. And you have to give him A for effort on that. And they didn't have the internet to check things. Anyway. There's some evidence that Andrew Pickens may have turned or decided to join the Patriot cause by December the 8th because he wrote a letter to Nathaniel Greene and he spoke like they were buddies, comrades or whatever. But anyway, a week after this happens, December 11th, the Georgians are continuing to go home, and McCall and Hammond are with them still. And now they're down in McCormick County on the way to Georgia, and they're out foraging. And Clarke and McCall have 100 men. Now, Few and Twiggs have about 300 or 400 men, and at this point I think Twiggs must have left or something because Benjamin Few was the commander of about 300 or 400 patriots, Georgia patriots, few South Carolina patriots. McCall and Clarke are out foraging with 100 men. Excuse me. Well, they're out foraging, and as they do, they run into another foraging party from 96. And so these parties start clashing. And John Harris Kruger at 96 realizes that, something's going on down there. So he sends Colonel Isaac Allen with 200 or 300 provincials who are Americans fighting for the British Army trained in the British way, uniforms in the British and all that. So, but they've been trained. Isaac Allen, and his 300 or 400 men are attacking now Clarke and McCall. And Clarke gets pretty seriously wounded in this battle. And they send word back to Benjamin Few, say we need to send some reinforcements, but Benjamin, that never happened. And Benjamin Few could say, oh, I didn't get that message, or I didn't know what was going on, or whatever, or he refused to do it, who knows. But that was a little kerfuffle, if you will. But December the 11th, 1780, 1 week after this battle here is the Battle of Long Canes in McCormick County. It's close to the Long Cane Massacre, but don't get the two confused. The Battle of Long Cane was a Loyalist victory. And at that battle, I told you about Isaac Allen and his men, but also at that battle was General Robert Cunningham from Lawrence County. He had his plantation on the Saluda River, right down this river here. There was a place to get across it from Greenville County into Lawrence County, and there was an island in the middle, like this island here maybe. It was called Island Ford. And that's where Robert Cunningham had his plantation, but he's based out of 96, and he has 110 Loyalist militia at the Battle of Long Canes. Now, where did those 110 Loyalist militia come from? These guys. What I think happened, I think these guys fought this battle here on a Saturday, spent the week coming through Lawrence County, plundering as they went, burned down Andrew Pickens' house, or plantation, James McCall's house, and then joined up at the victorious Loyalist victory at the Battle of Long Canes under the command of Robert Cunningham. So that was on December 11th. Shortly after that battle, John Harris Kruger, who is the commander at 96, Loyalist commander, former mayor of New York City, and he was a very capable military officer. He wrote to Cornwallis saying, I have desired the militia to scour the country. Desire the militia to scour the country. What was happening 2 weeks after he writes that to Cornwallis? The Fair Forest District in Spartanburg and Union County is being plundered. Who's it being plundered by? These yahoos from 96 is who it is. Now at this time, this is when Greene comes down from Virginia with the Continental Army. He divides his army. He sends Daniel Morgan over to Grindle Shoals on the Packlet River in Spartanburg County. And Daniel Morgan gets there on Christmas Day, 1780. And Nathaniel Greene sends his best cavalryman in the United States, William Washington, and the 3rd Continental Light Dragoons. He sends them to join up with Morgan. And as William Washington comes through the Fair Forest District, he sees the effects that these plundering Tories had created. The distress of the women and children stripped of all their possessions begs for redress. And he told that to Daniel Morgan. And Daniel Morgan said, well, hell yeah, go redress away. And he did. William Washington took his 80 dragoons of the 3rd Continental Light Dragoons, along with local mounted militia, under the command of James McCall, who fought here, had his house burned, fought at Long Canes, December the 11th. Now, December the 29th, he's leading 200 mounted militiamen with Thomas Brandon in the 2nd Spartan Regiment, Joseph Hayes and the Little River Regiment, which is Lawrence County, and Samuel Hammond and the lower 96th Regiment, which is Newberry County. James McCall, Samuel Hammond, they've hooked up back together. They've got Thomas Brandon, who is one hell of a fighting man, and Joseph Hayes, who is a hero at Cowpens. All of those men are coming after those Tories that were plundering the Fair Forest District. And those Tories got word that Washington was coming after him. So they started retreating. And they retreated 20 miles. And they retreated till they got to the Frontier store in the middle of Lawrence County, the social center of Lawrence County, Hammond's old store. Samuel Hammond's relative, Leroy Hammond, built the place. Samuel Hammond's very familiar with it. Joseph Hayes lived 5 miles from where Hammond's old store was. So the Tories got there at lunchtime, stacked their arms, and started laying around taking a noontime break. And while they had covered 20 miles, William Washington and the 200 mounted militiamen, they've covered 40 miles. And they crest the hill on the opposite side of the Bush River. That's where Hammond's old store was, overlooking the Bush River. And when William Washington and his men crested that hill, he had his mounted riflemen go to the flanks. They fired a volley into those Loyalists who were just strung out in a line, lollygagging around. And as that volley was fired, William Washington and his men charged forth with their swords and swords only, and they started chopping down those militiamen at Hammond's old store. Those militiamen that were here, Pickens House, Long Canes, Fair Forest, it's the same people. You know, these different groups just don't pop up out of nowhere. There's a thread going on here. And of the 250 plundering Tories, under the command of Robert Cunningham, as they were attacked at Hammond's old store, there was 150 of them killed or wounded. 40 of them were captured, and 60 of them escaped about 10 or 12 miles away to Fort Williams, where General Robert Cunningham was. And there was another battle and shootout there at that time where 8 more Loyalists were killed. So what I'm saying is, those Tories that were at Piedmont came down here, went down there, one at Long Canes, came up. It's the same people. Came up plundering the Fair Forest District, got slaughtered at Hammond's old store. That was December the 30th of 1780. So that's the chain of events that happened and evolved from this battle right here. Does anybody have any questions?